Hi friends, welcome to week 4 of the Every Bit Counts Challenge, where we are preserving something every day in the month of August. Our project for today is a super simple one. We are going to be preserving honey fermented garlic, and this one takes a month to ferment. So I wanted to show y'all, this is what it looks like after it's fermented. Honey fermented garlic is an amazing thing to have on hand in the winter months, and because it takes a month to ferment, we want to go ahead and get it started now. There's a ton of uses for honey fermented garlic. You can put it on toast in the morning, you smear the honey on bread, you can use the garlic in different recipes. It's going to have a sweet tinge to it. But the best thing about honey fermented garlic is that it is a way to really be a cold and flu buster. At the outset of colds, we always eat it, and it really does a good job of kind of squelching those viruses a lot of times. So this is one we always love to keep on hand. It's a great support for your immune system. The garlic has antibacterial, antiviral properties. It's just a fantastic thing to have in your pantry for the winter months. This one is really incredibly easy. We're gonna take 2 to 3 heads of garlic. These are bigger heads, we might only do 2. So what we're gonna do is peel them and crush them and put them in this jar. We want the jar to be filled about halfway. This is a pint jar. So let's get started. And if you've been with us a while, you know this trick. We put the garlic in the jar and we shake it up. And after a little while of shaking, you can just pull out the pieces that don't have the paper on them. So we just put them straight in here. So let's keep going, let's peel, let's crush, and let's put them in. All right, so we're about halfway full with garlic. And now what we want to do, I told you this was super easy. We're gonna take some honey. Now this is raw honey, and this is actually local honey to us from right down the road. We're gonna use this. Hopefully next year we'll be using our own honey, but we're not quite there yet with our bees. We're just gonna pour the honey over the garlic and make sure the garlic is nice and covered in the honey. Let's go ahead and we're gonna kind of shake this around and get that garlic all the way coated in that honey. And this is gonna be thick. This honey is super thick. We wanna make sure this garlic gets really coated well. It thins out as it ferments, and I'll show you what that looks like when we're all done. All right, we have the garlic sufficiently covered. I'm gonna go ahead when we store this and store it upside down. That way it has time to kind of all collect in the bottom. And every day I'm gonna flip it and I'm gonna burp it. And all burping is just, you're gonna open the lid slightly and let the gas out, because fermentation builds up gas and you don't want this to explode and ooze everywhere. Let me show you what this looks like once it's done fermenting. This is gonna ferment for about a month, and you can see how when it's done fermenting, it is super liquidy, and it'll get liquidy fairly quickly. And the garlic chunks get darker in here. And this is finished. This is what we've been eating on this year, the past few months. And I'm glad to have a new jar. We made 2 jars last year, and this is the second jar, and we're almost out of it. So once it is fermented for a month, and like I said, remember, make sure you're shaking it, make sure you're flipping it every day, and making sure those garlic pieces are still coated in honey all the time. And once you're finished with this, then after a month, it's ready to go and ready to use. You can leave it in the pantry. You don't have to put it in a cold storage like some of the other ferments. This one is gonna do just fine for several months in your pantry. And this is a great way to ward off colds and flus and illnesses that might come.
All right, so this one is a super easy and quick recipe. We're going to be canning blueberries in syrup. You could use this as toppings for pancakes, oatmeal, yogurt. You could just eat them, just stuff like that. So we're going to put our blueberries in with about 1/2 inch of headspace. We're just gonna stick them in here. And while we're doing this, I have my sugar light syrup boiling on the stove. The light syrup is 6.5 cups of water and 3/4 cup of sugar. And then you just let it boil after all the sugar is dissolved. All right, so our syrup is ready, and we're going to fill these with 1/2 inch headspace, which is the space between the liquid and the top of the jar. Poke it down in here and make sure there aren't any bubbles. You can screw the lids on finger tight and just a little bit more. And we'll just do that for all of these jars. All right, so these are done, and now they just have to sit in the water bath canner. Processing time is 15 minutes, which means once the water bath canner has started boiling, we'll let it sit like that for 15 minutes, and then once we take it off the heat, we'll let it sit for another 15 minutes before pulling these out. Okay, so now these are done. We're just gonna pull them out.
All right, we are back again. And this time, I'm gonna do some more potatoes. We did potatoes last week, but last week we were canning them. This week we're gonna do it a little bit different. I am going to dehydrate them, but not like dehydrated mashed potatoes. We've done that before. For this one, we're going to slice them and dehydrate the chips. Not chips like snacking on potato chips, but they'll be slices like that. And so a few things we're gonna do to get ready for that. I picked out about 18 potatoes. The reason I did that, this varies on the size of the potato, on how many bad pieces, bad chunks you get that you have to weed out, how thick you're slicing them. But we've done this before, and I can fit roughly 2 potatoes on each of our dehydrating trays. We've got 9 trays. And so this should at least be close. Of course, sometimes you have a little bitty potato and a great big potato, but we're gonna hope that it averages out fairly normal. So I am using, to speed things up, our meat slicer today. Not only will that speed things up, it's going to help us get consistent slices a lot faster and easier than me just chopping them with a knife. There are other tools around here that will take slices, but most of them are thinner than I want. The setting that I'm using here is about 2 millimeters on these, and that way at least they'll be consistent in the dehydrator. So here's what we're gonna do. Because my meat slicer over here is gonna be kind of loud, it's gonna be hard to talk while I'm doing that. So let me just explain the process and then we will get started. I'm going to slice these all up, leaving the skin on. That's one of the things that speeds this up and makes it easier. Skin is fine. I have a bowl of water. As I'm slicing, I'm just going to drop the slices in here. They're going to sit submerged while I'm going through this process. It'll probably only take me 20 minutes or so, maybe 30, to get through this. And then what we're going to do is blanch them over on the stove. So I have my second pot that I'm going to start heating now, because this is about 2/3 full of water. It takes a while for that to boil. After we get everything sliced, I'm going to pour them into, I'll drain the water off, dump them into my boiling pot, and we're going to blanch them for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll get them on the dehydrator. Now we're dehydrating at 135 degrees, and we're planning on this taking in the 8 to 10 hour range. Again, that depends on how thick you cut them. Check them, and you'll know when they're done. So let me get this starting to heat up, and then I will just start slicing, and here in a few minutes we'll move on to the blanching process. All right, so you may have noticed I did that pretty quick, and I piled some ends right here in front of me. That is only so that I could move faster. On this, and probably most slicers like this, there is an extra piece when you get down to just a small bit to keep your fingers away from the blade. Instead of putting this on, doing the last little bit, taking it off, starting a new potato, putting it on, I just saved these for the end. We're almost done. I do want to pause and talk about how we will use these. So since they're dehydrated, instead of canned, they're not cooked and ready to go. They are going to need to be rehydrated. There's a few ways you can do that. Number one, you can actually just cold rehydrate them. You can take some, dump them in a bowl of water, cover it. You can even put it back in the refrigerator, and within 2 to maybe 4 hours, the potatoes will absorb that water, rehydrate, and then they're ready to use however you would normally cook them. You can also boil them like rice or pasta, anything like that. And so you will need a pot full of water and bring it to a boil, put them in and let them simmer for around 20 minutes. Rehydrate them that way, and then you can serve them as is. You've just got sliced cooked potatoes at that point. You can also, it's kind of like buying the boxed mixes at the store with the dehydrated potato chips, and there's a powder mixture in there. You can find recipes online for different mixes if you like au gratin or scalloped, and mix those together with water, with powdered milk. Put them in the oven and they'll bake up in probably 40-45 minutes. And so there's several different things that you can do with them. This is just going to give us a different option. I don't know if it's faster while you wait on the dehydrator all night long, but it's very hands-off, right? So after just a little bit of prep, we get it in the dehydrator, we can move on to another project rather than the time that it takes with canning. And so we will vacuum seal these when we're all done, and they'll be ready for the next 6 months to open up and add to our meals. I'm going to finish these ends real fast, and I think our water is almost boiling over there, just in time to do our blanching. All right, there's my timer. Consider our potatoes blanched, but when you're blanching, what you want to do is stop the cooking process rather than taking them off and letting them retain that heat. So let's pull them off the stove. I filled this bowl back up with cold water. I put a little bit of ice in it, and I'm going to drain the hot water out and dump them in here before we start laying them out on our dehydrator trays. We got our potatoes into our cool water, and they're cool to the touch. They're ready to go. All we do now is start laying them out on our dehydrating mats. I didn't notice while I was cutting them, but I was slowly moving the back wall, the rest of the slicer as I was slicing, and so it was slowly getting a little thicker and a little thicker on me. I did catch it later on, but it means that a lot of my slices are different sizes. I was going for consistency. I failed on that one, but they're all different widths anyway. The little pieces are gonna dehydrate faster even if they were the same thickness, so it just is what it is. Again, these should take in the 8 to 10 hour range for dehydrating. We're going to let this go overnight, and we'll check them in the morning. If they're not ready before I leave for work, then Christy and the girls will check them for me, and we'll get them vacuum sealed up, ready to go. Since I know that we're getting roughly 2 potatoes per tray, then what we'll do is we'll bag them 2 trays to a bag. That'll be a good amount for our family. That's at least how we'll estimate it, and that'll get us through a meal, even if it's a little different from one to the next. And so we will finish traying these. We'll get them in the dehydrator and show you what they look like when they're all done. All right, we're back. Our potatoes were in the dehydrator for a little closer to 12 hours. We've got 7 trays, and I'm going to bag these into 3 bags. That's gonna be roughly 4 to 5 potatoes per bag. So I'm just gonna take this one extra tray and just give about, whoops, I lost one. Give about a third to each pile. That will roughly even them up. All right, you can do this in jars, but Toby the dog just tried the potato chip that fell on the floor, and he decided it wasn't a treat in dehydrated form. We're gonna use bags just because I'm not exactly sure how many it takes to fill up a jar, and I want specific amounts. I don't want wasted space in jars, so this will be easy. We've got our little food saver here. This is always the tricky part, figuring out how much bag you need. But I'm going to start my first one. All right, we are going to seal the bottom end of our bag. I may have gotten too much bag, but it says to leave 4 inches, so you have plenty of room to pull the air out and seal it up. So maybe I won't be off too far. Yeah, I think I'm off. I think I made my first bag way too big. I wonder, can I make 2 bags out of this one? Yep, I think so. There we go. And there we have it, 3 more side dishes for the pantry.
All right, another day and another canning project. This one is a delicious family favorite. It is beef stew. And a lot of times you will see beef stew done with carrots. We're leaving the carrots out because my husband doesn't really like them that much in his beef stew. So we are just using potatoes, onions, and beef, and a little bit of salt. Because we're canning low acidity food, we need to do this in the pressure canner. But this is a great way to get some really easy convenience food on your shelf, because when these are done, you'll be able to just open them up, dump them, and heat them up, and they're ready to go. To get started over on my stove, I have a big pot of water boiling, which is what we'll use as the brine to pour over these. And I've got my pressure canner water heating up because we're gonna have hot water in these jars, and the jars are warmed. We don't wanna put hot jars into a cold canner, because like we said before, that's just a recipe for the jars to break. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to peel and chop these potatoes. And there isn't just like a strict recipe for this. We're just gonna put some beef, some potatoes, and some onions in. You can really customize this to how you like. I had some potatoes left over from our other food preservations, and so we wanted to go ahead and use these up, and this is a fantastic way. Now, when you're canning root vegetables, you want to make sure you do peel them. That's important because their peels can harbor bacteria. So like for potatoes or for carrots, you'll want to peel them first. And also, especially with carrots, if you can them with the peels on, they can have this really bitter taste. So it tastes better and it's safer to peel root vegetables. And I've also found when I'm making this recipe, when you're choosing potatoes, these happen to be russet potatoes because that's just what we have left over. But I have found that the Yukon Golds actually hold up a little better to this pressure canning. The russet potatoes will get a little more smushy, so part of that is just preference. But since we have these, we're gonna go ahead and use them. And they're not bad by any means, but if you like a firmer potato, I would go with the Yukon Gold. All right, next I'm gonna chop this onion and get it ready to go in the jars. The size doesn't really matter. It's really your preference of what you like and the size that you like in your soups. All right, now for the easy part, we're gonna take this and layer it in our jars. We want a 1 inch of headspace. Remember, headspace is the distance between the top of whatever you're canning and the top of the jar. So first, let's take our beef and we're gonna put this in the jar, maybe about a cup of beef per jar. But again, remember, this recipe is just more of guidelines than a recipe. All of these ingredients are safe to can in a pressure canner, so it doesn't really matter what proportion you use. All right, nice clean hands. I'm gonna go ahead and put a few onions in each jar. I don't want it to be too terribly oniony, but I do want that boost of flavor. And then finally, I'm gonna put my potatoes in the jar. And I just wanna make sure that I adhere to the 1 inch headspace guideline. And it looks like I guesstimated almost perfectly, which is super cool. Now you can put seasoning in these. I'm just gonna put a little salt in each of these. This is gonna flavor them a little bit, but that way when we pull them out, we can season them ourselves however we want. And the last thing to do is ladle the boiling water on them. I have this canning funnel to make that easier. And remember, still with this water, we want to adhere to the 1 inch headspace. And we just let this fill in the cracks and crevices up to 1 inch. Now we're gonna take our little spatula and we're gonna just push it down in and release some of the bubbles and just make sure we're still sitting at 1 inch of headspace. And if it drops down a little bit at this point, we can add a little bit more water. Now, because I'm using beef and it's got a little bit of fat in it, I'm actually going to clean the rims of these with vinegar. Vinegar can cut that fat, so if there's any sitting on that rim, it makes the jar lie down flat. But I do want to make sure I wipe off the vinegar. Now let's get these lids on. Let's lay the lid down, tighten it finger tight and a 1/4 turn more. And now these are ready for the canner, so let's start that process. Okay, I have my warm water in the canner and I'm gonna go ahead and lower my jars down. And I heated up this water because, again, you don't want to put warm jars in cold water. Now this is a pretty long canning time. This is gonna be 1.5 hours, which means I want to make sure I have enough liquid in here. You don't cover the jars in a pressure canner. You want 2 to 4 inches of liquid in there after the jars are in. But because this is a long can, I'm gonna lean more towards the 4 inches to make sure that we don't boil out all the water. I'm also gonna put a little bit of vinegar in here. One of our lovely viewers told us this years ago. And we have really hard water, and if we don't put vinegar in our water, the jars come out and they're covered in that calcification. They're safe and they're fine, but it's just not very pretty and it's a pain to clean off. But one of our viewers told us if you put that dash of vinegar in, it saves it from calcifying, and it really works. It's amazing. So we do that every time we can, or every time we remember. And we have an all-American pressure canner, and if you've been with us a while, you know the drill. The first thing we always do is look through to make sure we can see through the hole. And I can see light through that hole, so the canner is ready to go. This is where steam escapes, and you don't ever want that plugged in. Now with our canner, it's all American, we're gonna go ahead and put olive oil. We don't have a rubber gasket, so it's metal to metal. We just put a little olive oil lubrication on this. Helps the seal and it helps lubricate. There's a divot right here and an arrow on the lid that helps us know how to put this on. And we just twist it. And then We're gonna twist these down opposite sides a little at a time. I'm kind of rushing through this, but we have tons of pressure canning videos on our website that really we go into many more details if you're interested. I'll post the food preservation list in our description. All right, make sure these are tight. Now, as far as the canning process, it's gonna take this one a while, but thankfully I can be doing other things while this is going. This one has an hour and a half processing time. So the way we measure that, first of all, you need to know your pressure for your altitude. Ours is 10 PSI. If you live anywhere else, you need to check the Ball Canning website or the USDA website and find out the pressure for your altitude to make sure you're safely pressure canning. But ours is 10, and we have a little weight. Some of the pressure canners function differently. Make sure you read the instructions for your pressure canner. We're gonna set the canner on the stove, and we're gonna turn the heat up so it starts boiling. And what we are looking for first is for steam to come out of this nozzle. When steam comes out of this nozzle, then we're gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. And once that steam has pushed out for 10 minutes, it kind of regulates the inside, then we're gonna put the pressure canner weight on 10 PSI for our altitude, and we're gonna wait for this weight to start jiggling. Once this weight starts jiggling, we set our timer. Now our timer is gonna be set for an hour and a half. As we go throughout this canning process, our ideal jiggling time is gonna be 3 to 4 times per minute. So if it's jiggling constantly, you wanna turn that down. You wanna turn the heat down, and you wanna get it right around that 3 to 4 times per minute. And once we get it regulated to that 3 or 4 times a minute, you can kind of ignore it until it's done. And once it's done, once we get that hour and a half, we're gonna turn the heat off and let the pressure come all the way down to 0 before you touch it. That's why this little gauge is handy right here. Once the gauge is down to 0, we're gonna remove this and let this depressurize for a little bit. And then in about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll crack the lid a little bit and let some of the steam vent out for a few minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And this whole time we're setting and we're waiting, because if you just rip the lid off and you start pulling jars out, there's such a huge temperature difference. You can get what's called siphoning, and we don't want that. So the longer you wait in these different little periods, the better off you'll be. Now, you don't want to leave your canned goods in too long, or they'll develop what's called canning sour, like if you just leave them overnight and ignore them. We don't want to do that, but we do want to take our time with the pressure release process. So let's go ahead and let's get started with that, and I'll see you back here when these are ready to come out. Okay, now we are ready to pull these out. And as you can see, the pressure canning process cooks that meat. And we have some beautiful cans of stew ready to go. These are just perfect for super busy nights. All right, I think Michaela is gonna can stroganoff tomorrow, so we'll see you then.
I have the infinity canning gauntlet. So the next thing we're gonna be pressure canning is beef stroganoff, and I love this stuff. It is delicious. While we're doing this, we have our water boiling, and so let's get started. We're gonna have a pound of beef in each of these jars. These are quart jars. All right, and now I'm gonna make sure I wash my hands off. So next we're going to be adding half a cup of chopped mushrooms to each of these jars. We'll link the recipe for this down below. And next we're going to add half a cup of chopped onions. To each jar. 2 tablespoons of tomato paste in each jar. Yes. Okay.
Here, let me show you.
I know how to, I just can't.
Okay, come here. Let's set it on a table.
I know how to. You press down on the middle and lift.
Well,
Did she just do it while she was proving she couldn't do it?
Okay, and so next we're going to add a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, teaspoon of thyme, teaspoon of parsley, a garlic clove. We have these smashed. 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. So now we're going to fill these up with 1 inch of headspace. This is boiling water. All right, so now we're going to wipe our rims off, and this time instead of using water, we're going to use vinegar. The reason we're using vinegar is because since we have meat in here, if any grease gets on the seal, this will cut the grease. We are pressure canning this, so if you do not remember how to do that, it is the same way my mom did it in the last project. Finger tight and just a bit more. The processing time for these is 1.5 hours, and I will see you back when these are done. All right, our stroganoff is finally out. It looks delicious. So this is future Michaela popping in here. What I forgot to tell you was how you prepare this beef stroganoff. And all you do is you add some sour cream and some thickener. You can't can those ingredients ahead of time because they're not safe to can with this recipe.
All right, that is it for this week. We took a couple of days off this week because we had the county fair, and we have a couple of girls in 4-H, and we do a whole lot with the county fair, and it was just too much. But 5 days worth of canning, this is our progress for the month so far. And as you can see, even though we missed 2 days, it's starting to add up a whole lot. We have tons of food to put in our pantry, and we are super excited. But don't go anywhere. I will fill you in. We will have a whole video on the county fair, but we wanted to give you a little sneak peek of one thing. We have a new princess. Michaela won Pontotoc County's 4-H Princess Award, so she is the reigning princess for the year. And she wanted to say hi, hello. Give your best princess wave. Are you excited? Yeah. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining. We got 1 week left in the Every Bit Counts challenge. Let's see how much we can together. Y'all have a wonderful week.